interesting life story of things he's done, and is one of the most impressive people I know with what he's designed architecturally here in town, and the positions he's held. For instance, he was the diversity person in Mayor Cooper's office, and that is the topic he's going to share with us today. Fabian Bedne.
Yay!
Thank you for inviting me, but mostly thank you all for spending some time with us today. I know you have better things to do, so I appreciate your interest. My background is in architecture, but I'm also a recovering politician. I served 2 terms in the council, and I just finished working for Mayor Cooper, working on providing advice on things that had to do with the built environment. My passion as an immigrant is to make sure that people know of the immigrant experience, so I took the liberty of framing the presentation today from that point of view. So I'm not going to talk about every minority or any ethnic group in the city. I'm going to focus on people that happen to be new Americans, because we are more the invisible people in the city. Things are usually not designed or prepared to accommodate the needs and wants of new Americans. So I hope you don't mind if I focus on that today. So that was going to be my next slide. There, introduction. Anyway, we have just 1 hour, right? Yeah, so I'm going to go very fast, and anybody that wants the PowerPoint, I'll leave it with her and she can share with you all. Well, this is a historical context for Nashville. We started, and you probably, if you are passionate about history, you probably know all this, how immigrants got to the city, you know, that we used to be a Native American, then white, then we started getting other groups coming in, and then towards last century, we started getting more new Americans coming to the city. And so the increase of new Americans in the city is a very recent development, and like I said, this whole thing is just a chronology of it, and I'll be happy to share with you all later. My wife told me yesterday, you only have 1 hour, you won't be able to go through the whole PowerPoint, so make sure they have copies. What I'm interested in doing today is making the point that you really cannot put all immigrants in one bottle, on one box. Each immigrant group has a different story, a different way to arrive into the city, a different way of engaging, and so that's what I was going to go through as I walk through things in the next slides. If you go to the census data, you'll see you know, what is the composition of whites and blacks and new Americans in the city and Latinos. If you look at to the right of the slide, it shows how the city is going to grow in coming years. And I think you can notice that the white population and the black population is going to stay the same, while the new American and Latino population is going to grow. So over the years, the city is going to get more diverse, and the ethnic diversity will get even wider. And I think that's an important point that I wanted to make today, that it shows that the white and black population is kind of stable and will likely stay the same, but the other groups are going to continue to increase. So I want to talk a little bit about immigration, although it's not the reason of the presentation, because people many times don't understand, not all Latinos are immigrants, not all immigrants are Latinos. Latinos and immigrants can have different types of immigration status. I mean, you can be a Latino citizen, or you can be a Latino permanent resident, which is somebody has a green card, for example. You can be a visa holder, somebody has a H-1B visa or another type of visa. Or you can be a visa applicant. I mean, you can be applying for a visa and yet not have any paperwork showing that you are lawfully in the country, but you are lawfully in the country until they actually give you a response on your application. You can be a refugee or an asylum seeker. An asylum seeker is somebody that comes to the border of the country and asks to come into the US because it's experiencing hardship back home. Or you can be a refugee, somebody that applied in Somalia or in Afghanistan or in Syria and is granted a refugee status and comes to the US. You can have a TPS, temporary protected status, which is not a permanent visa, it's something that you get for a period of time, like Venezuelans right now in Nashville have TPS. You can be an undocumented resident, somebody that came through the border and snuck in the country, or somebody that overstayed their visa and their visa expired and they stay. And you can have deferred action is a DACA recipient, somebody who doesn't have an immigration status, but the government gives them deferred action that allows them to work. He gets a social security number. The first famous person that got that was John Lennon. I don't know if you guys knew that he was he had a DACA at some point. So what I'm trying to show you is that it's very hard to understand the tapestry of the immigrant experience, and each immigrant is not the same. That's all I wanted to make the point here. The next slide shows how people live in the city. Everything you see blue is predominantly white. Everything you see green is predominantly black. And then you have Hispanics are the little brown colors. And then you have Asian and others. The map on the right shows the parts of the region that have grown dramatically. And what I have noticed is that a lot of immigrants have moved to Wilson County or to Rutherford County because they couldn't afford to live in the city. And so there is a big growth. What you see on the bottom right and bottom on top right is places that are becoming places where new immigrants are moving in because that's the place they can afford to live. Places where they used to live, like in the Woodbine region in the city or any of, are becoming gentrified, and they are not able to stay there. So there isn't a permanent location for new Americans to live, for all these ethnic groups to live, and that is driven by the economy. So I'm surprised many times when people say, well, Latinos live in Lawrenceville Road. It's not a permanent location. An immigrant will tend to live on the places that are more affordable. When you first get to this country, when I first got to this country, I had only 2 suitcases and I had to survive. I had to find a way to live. So you tend to have a will to survive, you know, and you just find a place that you can afford and that's where you live. And so that tends to be houses that are substandard and places that don't necessarily meet codes, but are affordable. So, and that happened to be what was happening on Nashville Road on Woodbine. But as those houses started to get fixed, then people end up moving to other places. So don't think about the place where immigrants live or the different ethnic groups as permanent locations. I am first generation immigrant in the US, I'm a third generation immigrant in Argentina. And where I live in Argentina wasn't where my parents or my grandparents have lived. As you go into the next generation, you move to the place that is more convenient to you, and that's going to happen in Nashville as well. So I just wanted to tie growth with ethnic diversity. Anyway, now comes to the part where I tell you about the different groups. So Betsy Phillip wrote a very interesting story on the Nashville scene the other day, talking about the first recorded Chinese person that died in Nashville. And again, you can find this on the Nashville scene. She wrote a very good article. I just tried to put a small description. The point is that going back to the 1800s, we already had Chinese people living in the area, and this is something that it hasn't been recorded. We don't really know in a recorded way where immigrants have lived, and that's part of what I was telling you before about being invisible. Many of us, our histories are not necessarily recorded or shared or logged in as much as we would like to. So that's the story of Shang Zhe-Yu that died, that arrived in Nashville in the 1870s and died on August 26, 1878. And his struggle to for people to find a place to bury him. Apparently, he couldn't get buried in a white cemetery. They wouldn't let that happen, and so he ended up in Mount Ararat Cemetery. So that's how I wanted to start. Like, we've had Chinese people in Nashville from the 1800s. Egyptians, it's a different group, and it's also an interesting thing. And here's what I started telling you, how each group may have arrived to Nashville in a different way. Egyptians got here totally by accident. When they were finishing the Gaylord Hotel, they needed people to work on hospitality at the hotel. They couldn't find enough people, so they started offering jobs for people that were in New York. These were citizens that happened to live in New York, were Egyptians, and they started coming here. And this is something that happens quite often, that a new American comes to the city, finds work, and they'll bring their family, they'll bring their friends, and it just starts developing a community. So we now have 12,000 Egyptians in Nashville. They have their own churches and communities, and they are very established, but they just got here because of Gaylord Hotel. And so that's how it happened. So that's one group of people that has a unique story. The next group of people that come to the city are refugees. We have Catholic charities in the city, and as I told you before, refugees are people that apply back home, and the government accepts them to come and resettle in the U.S. To be safe for an amount of time. And Catholic Charities does a good job helping those people find a place to live and be safe. So we have Bhutanese and Burmese and people from Congo, more recently Afghanistan, Syria, Ukraine, have come to Nashville, and that's how some of those communities have been established here. So about 10,000 refugees have come to the city thanks to the generosity of our government, and that's since 1991. So that's, again, another serendipity thing. If Catholic Charities was located in Louisville, Kentucky, that's where they would be, but they happen to be located here, and this is where they have the resettlement program. And that's why, I don't know if you guys knew, but there are many Laotians that live, and Burmese that live in town. There is even a Laotian community center temple in the middle of Cambridge in Antioch, and they have events, and they celebrate their holidays and everything. And so it is interesting how something as serendipity as this program has built a community here in the city. Japanese has a completely different story. Japanese are really the result of Governor Alexander, who was interested in increasing business in Tennessee, and he started pushing for companies to relocate here. When the companies come, they usually bring their own stuff, and so we have about 8,000 Japanese descendants living in the city. In the picture you see Mina Johnson, who's Japanese American, and she was the first Japanese American elected to Metro Council. We served together, and so it is not only about being in the city and being part of that diversity, but also arriving in a sense of becoming part of the establishment and being part of the government. So I think it's an interesting story of how different groups of people. I keep saying this, but it amazes me that that is like that, because people tend to think that we're all the same, right? That it's the same way that gets people to the city, but each group of people will have a different story. The Kurdish community is another great story. They had different waves of immigration due to hardship back home and the war in Iraq and what happened back then. And now it's it's a huge community that lives in the city. We recently ended up a couple of months ago. The governor of Erbil came to Nashville, and we signed a treaty to be sister city with Erbil in Kurdistan. And the picture you see here is the Kurdish community at the downtown library celebrating the signing of the agreement. And it is very cool when people realize that they are not invisible anymore, that they have something, that they're being recognized for who they are, and being respected and coming to the limelight. And I keep talking about invisibility because that's the way you feel when you're an immigrant. And so I think the Kurdish people have struggled enough, and that they have built a community here. They're very prosperous, they own businesses, and they are in many parts of the city involved, but now they're also visible because of the Sister City program and other programs like that. It's one of the biggest communities outside of Kurdistan here in the US. Latinos is a whole other thing. We are one of the biggest communities. For example, in the picture at the bottom, you will see Councilmember Sandra Sepulveda, who is Latina, but she's not an immigrant. Her parents were immigrants. Judge Escobar, she's an immigrant from Colombia, and I am an immigrant from Argentina. The reason I show that picture is because, you know, we are also part of the government now, or I have been part of the government. Councilmember Sepulveda and Judge Escobar are part of the government right now. And that is an important thing to stop being invisible. When you're part of the government, you can actually help create laws that are more inclusive instead of that are a result of institutional racism. The thing that I wanted to show on these slides are different ways of how Latinos tend to be. On the bottom left, you see the Venezuelan people voting here in Nashville some years back. On the right, you see Cuban people asking for democracy in Cuba. On the top left, you see a Plaza Mariachi Mexican dancing. On the top right, you see a group of Mexican dancers in the symphony having an event that they do every year. And then on the top center, you see a group of families being part of an Easter event, egg hunt on the Southeast Community Center. So there are different ways in which Latinos express themselves and participate in the city. But if I told you before what happens with all the different groups, Latinos is a whole other thing, because even Latinos from Mexico, depending on what part of Mexico they are, they will have a different outcome. I mean, just like in the US, you think about, you know, if you are a northerner, if you are a southerner, or if you are from California, there are different attitudes and ways of doing things and belief systems and so forth. The same is in Mexico. And that's just Mexico. And then we have people in here that are from Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Colombia, Venezuela, all over the place, and each one with their own nuances and needs and wants. So when we talk about diversity, just don't think about us Latinos as one monolithic group. I mean, what applies to one Latino may not apply to the next one. I'm an Argentine from Buenos Aires, and somebody that is from the provinces in Argentina wouldn't necessarily even speak with the same accent that I speak. And so it is really depending on what part of the Latin America a person is, how they will react, or what their value system might be, or what food they eat. I mean, I get frustrated many times people ask me about Dia de los Muertos. Dia de los Muertos is a Mexican celebration. We don't do it in Argentina. But people think that because I'm Latino, Dia de los Muertos will apply to me as well. And I'm happy for my Mexican brothers and sisters that they celebrate that, but I don't do it. But also, I don't dance tango, and I'm Argentine, so that probably doesn't apply to me either. Anyway, I'm just trying to make the point that even within the Latino community is very diverse, depending on where somebody comes from. Integration is something that we have come a long way. On the top left, you see a graduation class of the My City Academy under Mayor Carl Dean, Ana Escobar, who was at the time working as a clerk, I believe. They started a program called the My City Academy, and also the New American Advisory Council. And so on the top left, you see a graduation ceremony of the My City Academy. And basically, it's a way for New Americans to learn about the city. it is important for people. They are thirsty to understand the rules and how things happen and how to better integrate. And so this academy does a good job with that, and is open to all. As a matter of fact, Mayor O'Connell was a student of the first academy when they started. It is a very good opportunity for people to learn about the city. On the bottom right, you see a meeting of the Advisory Council, the New American Advisory Council, and it has people from all different communities and groups. You have people in this picture on the top. On the bottom left, you see somebody from Kurdistan, from the Salahadin Center. You see people from Africa, from the Middle East, and they are there to serve as a bridge between the mayor's office and the community. I'm passionate about soccer, and that's why I show that picture, but what I love about soccer is that you go to a game and everybody speaks soccer. There is no language. I mean, you're just celebrating a common moment and being happy about it, and so for me, it's an example of integration. And at the bottom left is another event that celebrates New Americans and is done by somebody who's an immigrant. It's the Amplify event that happens every year. Anyway, there is, I hear all the time why people don't integrate. And the reason is that people don't know that Latinos and New Americans want to integrate. There is a constant effort to learn more about how to get involved and how to participate. There just needs to be more avenues and venues for people to do that. So it's happening. It's just it doesn't show up on the news necessarily, and I just want to make sure you knew about it. Collaboration is another way of integration. This is something I was private to see. On the top left, you see when we had that big tornado that happened like 3-4 years ago that went through the city and did a lot of damage. The Latino community came forward, and hundreds of Latino workers got together at Plaza Mariachi and then went on to help rebuild and do repairs for people that had suffered because of that tornado. Again, it's probably something that it didn't show up on the news, but I just wanted to remind people that there is a constant interest in collaboration and participation. Oh, I don't want to restart. Do you? I'm going to snooze you. So that's the other thing I wanted to show that is also part of what people want to do. This is something that I think is very symbolic. Back in 2008, they firebombed a mosque in Columbia, Tennessee. Those are the pictures on the left. We went there to support the community, and only like 10 years later, Nashville elected the first Muslim council member on Sufat Suar. And I think what I like about it is that we are evolving and we are being more inclusive as a city. I mean, I could have shown also the English-only defeat that happened in the city, but I think this is more symbolic in the contrast of going from, firebombing a mosque to electing somebody that happened to be Muslim. Okay, so I'm almost to the end, so this is what I wanted to show you. There is about 141 languages being spoken in the metro schools. We don't really have a way to have a good sense of how many people live in the city. The census is not very accurate in giving us a good description of the breakdown of the ethnic diversity. So I decided to use metro schools data, and later on I'll show you with more detail the languages that are spoken at home. But it's very hard to get a sense of how to measure all that ethnic diversity. When we were doing the census, I was part of the mayor's office, and we tried to encourage people to participate in the process, but many people are afraid because their immigration status, or for whatever reason, they just don't trust the government. When you're coming from a country that the government tends to be repressive, you don't want the government to know more about it. So the census is a good effort to get data, but I would encourage you guys to rely on metro schools because they actually have to report this to the state, and it's an important measure of the diversity of the city. And I put the information at the bottom. EL office is the office that works with English learners to try to get them up to speed so they can participate better in the system. And an interesting thing is that you may have kids that speak very well English, but the parents may not speak very well English at home. So that when you're trying to teach, you're teaching the family, you're not teaching the child, and so having a system in place that can engage with the parents is important. And this is my last slide, I think. And this is many slides, and you will, and this is how people self-report, right? The metro schools gave you those numbers, and you can see how they report what they speak at home. That doesn't mean that they don't speak English. It just means, for example, Albanian, there are 39 kids that reported that they speak Albanian at home or they are from that background. So this is one slide, and this is the other one. As you can see, the biggest one is, after English, is Spanish, 24,767. But there is people from all over the world. And so that's why it was hard for me to talk to you about ethnic diversity and the history, because we are a very diverse group of people with different backgrounds. But the point I was trying to make today is that it's just not one thing fits all. It's very diverse, and as you're trying to understand the different groups, you have to really dig in and try to get to know that person. And so I come to the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to take questions from you all.
What do you predict Nashville will be like in 2050, another 20-something years?
Well, as I showed on the slide before, let me go back to that one. The New American population and the Latino population is going to continue to grow. We see, one of the things I do, I forgot to mention this, I do weddings. I've done like 2,000 weddings, and I tend to be asked by Latinos to perform weddings because I can do civil weddings in Spanish. And I go to these weddings, and there are so many kids. And so I think we are seeing a demographic shift where many Latinos are having big families, and we're going to see an increase in second generation, third generation Latinos in the city. And I think that's explained that yellow band that gets wider and wider there.
How about the Americanization of these forthcoming generations?
They are very thirsty for integration, and they don't want to ignore their background. They just want to be part of the system, and they want to belong, and they want to be successful. They want to contribute, give back. And so I think if that's what you refer with Americanization, then yes, I think you're going to see. You see it already. I mean, I meet many of these kids, and they don't speak Spanish. They only speak English because their parents, just like my kids, for example. My son speaks some Spanish, my daughter doesn't, and it's because you just are from here, right? And you just want your kids to be successful, and that's the language that is speaking in this country. But that doesn't mean that there is anything wrong with people that try to honor their background and they speak other languages at home. I don't think language is the reason why people don't integrate. I think one of the reasons people can integrate many times is because there are roadblocks on the system already that prevent people from being successful. I'll give you an example. I have a degree in architecture I have a license back in Argentina, but coming into the US, my degree just didn't fit with the local definition of a degree. Although I had an equivalent of a master's in architecture, it just didn't necessarily fit in the local framework. So I had met like people that were surgeons back in Mexico, and they were working as framers, and I had met like this guy that back in Venezuela was a diplomat. He was working in a warehouse, and the reason to do that is because you have to survive, right? You come here, you have to pay the rent, you have to provide for your family, and so the first thing you do is to try to take care of the basics. But then it's also that it's very hard to get your background to kind of fit in with you know, when you go apply for a job in the US, they expect somebody from an accredited degree. Well, you know, if you have a degree from Caracas, Venezuela, that's not necessarily an accredited degree. Yes?
I noticed from some of your slides that the white population is 60% of the city, but in the public schools, it's less than the black and Hispanic. It's only 27% of whites in public schools. Are they all in private school?
You have to ask, I mean, my kids went to public school. I think that might be the reason, homeschooling, private schools. But yeah, that might be it. I don't know. Good question, thank you. Sorry to answer.
Avoiding the other populations.
Yes.
Or,
Yes, sir.
or their parents think getting a better education.
Sir?
Yeah, I would like to say, I really like to use pretty often integration, and that's the key. And the young people like to integrate into the system. But in my opinion, the system does not like to accept that. And that's the key problem in my view, how I see, you know, and I grew up, I'm American, I grew up in a different country where the similar problem when the system didn't like to accept people to unify, they artificially split. And our country unfortunately like to split in the different groups, either on the party affiliation, you cannot be independent, you know, also for nationality or ethnic background. Whenever you go, they ask you for that question. No, I am American. That's not the first place. And then you can culturally speak different languages at home, and that's respectful and should be. That's, I think, is key problem. System does not like to accept diversity and integrate to American society.
Yeah, and I don't think it's because the society is against the Americans. It's people don't know what they don't know. And so the system has been creating something that works for the system for so long. And that's why for me, it's important to have people from those communities in places of power so they can influence and adjust the status quo to be more welcoming and to remove some of those roadblocks. So, I mean, as I got elected, I was the first immigrant elected to office, and one of the things I tried to do was to remove some of those barriers so people could be successful in integration. I don't think none of us wants to change this place. I mean, we just want it to be more welcoming. So that's my point of view.
Fabian.
I think somebody over there had a question. Yes, sir.
I've lived in Nashville for 9 years, and my family moved here for a lot of the great things the city offers, and we were surprised at the ethnic diversity that we weren't expecting. You know, we moved from Florida, which was a little bit more diverse. I'm surprised to see all of this, because as I think it's a diverse place, it's even more diverse than I know. Is there any intentionality here, or is it, I mean, I saw like the 12,000 Egyptians, that's surprising to me. I knew, because I go to the Opera Inn and have had a chance to meet, but is there any intentionality, or was there an intentionality in the beginning to bring in and welcome? I'm imagining if you're like a Christian community center or one of those things that were mentioned, in order for you to bring in a large population, you have to establish or be ready to bring in those people. So is there an intentionality from the government or community systems that made this so diverse, or are we just lucky, or is it just chance?
Well, I remember Mayor Colleen used to say, used to paraphrase, now you are free to roam around the country like the Rolling Company. And he used to say that we like that people can choose to live anywhere and they choose to come to Nashville. And I think for many years Nashville has been interested in growing and creating more opportunities for local residents, for bringing more companies, and I think so that would be part of the intentionality. I don't think that the city set out to increase the number of new Americans that live in the city. The city was just interested in migration and just creating more opportunities and more economic opportunities for long-term residents, and also that means like having companies like Firestone or, you know, Bridgestone or Nissan coming into the area, which in turn bring new Americans as well. But yeah, I don't think that nobody set out to say, hey, let's make Nashville an immigrant city. I don't think that was the case. It's just the welcoming nature of the city. The city was one of the first to create and to sign up to something called Welcome in America. There was a person, his name is David Llewellyn, who was the person that created the Tennessee Immigrant Refugee Rights Coalition. When he left that nonprofit, he started this program called Welcome in America. And the whole idea was to help cities be more welcoming to people from all backgrounds. And now it's all over the country. I mean, cities have signed up to be welcoming cities. So there are things you can do to remove some of the roadblocks that we were talking about before. But it's just, I don't think that's the main goal of Nashville. I think Nashville just wants to make sure that local residents are successful and don't have to leave the city and move to another place and can pay their bills and raise their families safe. I mean, I sound like a politician. I can't help myself. Yes, Ms. Goff.
Fabian, so I know that sometimes it might seem that integration is slow, but one of the things that I see Nashville doing is having festivals in the different communities. I know like Cheapwood is doing Day of the Dead this weekend. And when you go to these festivals, you're able to interact with people and eat food and see customs. And I think that's a nice way. That and volunteering in the metro schools are nice ways to have these interactions.
Yeah, and I didn't talk about the nonprofits. We have a good nonprofit ecosystem in Nashville that helps people that happen to be new Americans integrate, like Conexión Americas, for example, has a program that works with the families to help them be successful in the school system. So there are many programs that people can get involved to if they're interested in supporting integration and supporting the process.
Are any of these groups hostile to one another?
No, I think there might be some healthy competition.
Okay,
But I don't
soccer, maybe. But what I'm thinking of, when I was at Hillsborough, there were problems with Asia.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see what you mean. You talk about different New American groups. I really don't know.
It wasn't the Americans who were unhappy, it was different Asian groups.
Hey, we are not perfect. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, but I don't think that there is any necessarily systemic. I haven't heard from any particular group of the representatives being hostile to another group. But in soccer, if somebody's not from your team, you don't like it. So, yes, ma'am.
I came here from outside Chicago, and there's a lot of neighborhoods in Chicago. And one of them was Serbian and one was Bosnian. And there was hostility between those two during the conflict. So I think their heritage, the things that are happening in their home countries can play into even when they're living in the United States.
Can you say a little bit more about that?
Well, there were actually on the Chicago Bulls, there was a player from Serbia and a player from Bosnia, and they could not be in the same locker room together. But there were conflicts between the two neighborhoods. There wasn't an all-out war, but there were conflicts. And I think there was a bloody war going on over there. And I think, how could you not?
Can you
So I
hear
think
what
that
she's
can
saying?
I mean,
happen.
to my knowledge, and I'm really familiar with that, that's what divides the people. To my knowledge, these people in Chicago, they're pretty much, they're going well. A soccer player, what he said, that's in any sport, especially in Europe,
Right.
they will not get along. We have that in Switzerland, they play from Albania and Serbia, but you cannot point that
No, I'm
between
just saying
two
that-
people, especially in
No, it
sports.
wasn't just those two. And unfortunately, they brought in a pretty large police presence at the time just to keep things quiet. And some of the residents didn't like it, but it all calmed down. And I think how, I can't see how it could happen, really. I mean, it was a terrible, terrible conflict.
Yeah, I don't wanna lie to you, I don't wanna say that there's no conflict, but I'm not aware of any.
Yeah.
Which
You
means
know,
that
I
maybe I live a sheltered life.
No, it wasn't all-out war in those neighborhoods, believe me.
Sir,
Yes, I think you mentioned that you have interest in the built environment.
yes.
And I wonder if you would say a little more about that interest and about that work.
Yeah, I mean, an example of how institutional racism or roadblocks can impact the way the city is what happened with the highway system. For example, that it cut through a traditional neighborhood, African-American neighborhood, and it just created a lot of displacement and isolation, and it broke through that community. So intentionally or otherwise, policies get driven by things that have to do with that. There is a very good movie by, I think it's PBS that made it, that deals with the impact of discrimination and the school system, school zoning, and how that impacted how people were more or less successful in the city. So there is the city, the way the city looks like many times is driven by policies created by the group of people that have power. So that's why, again, I think it's very important that we have somebody that can speak for our African community and Muslim community through Councilmember Suara or Judge Escobar or Councilmember Sepulveda, because one thing I noticed being in the mayor's office or in the council is many times I could see that people were suggesting policies because they didn't know any better, and I would say, well, but if you do that, this is the impact it's going to have in the Latino community. And so they will change it. So many times it's not that people are mean or racist or anything, they just don't know any better. And so having people in places of power helps create better policy. I'm not saying, I'm not naive, I know that we have racism in our society, but in many cases, racism is not the reason, it's just that people don't know any better because they don't have a way to learn from the people that are impacted by those policies. Yeah, I don't think
Sure. One I wanted to add to the participant of the listener over here who was asking about Nashville's diversity and the historic diversity and the reasons for it. Obviously, there are plenty, but one of the things that I've seen, reading about, and you brought it up in your slideshow, is that over all the years, with Nashville being having a diverse economic environment between healthcare, manufacturing, other stuff, retail, with Opryland bringing in an Egyptian work crew that then created a presence there, and just growing up, many folks have found, and many workers have found, at least a tolerable, if not allowing place here in Nashville, if not welcoming, over all the years from the 1800s on, and with the non-unionization sort of like free, right to work environment with Nashville, it has brought a lot of workers in and a lot of the different populations in from all over. So that's always been it's always been a interesting and I think hopefully a strength of Nashville, that because of the economic diversity, we've gotten workers from all over, and eventually, and much of the time, they then bring in families and relatives. Which was leading, I was going to ask you, looking at the diversity for Nashville, is my impression, native Nashvilleian, so I'm partisan here, is Nashville one of the best of the top 4 cities in Tennessee to have diversity or to welcome, or Memphis doesn't seem to have that much. I don't know about Knoxville and Chattanooga. I did not know whether we stand out any more than other cities in Tennessee or in the South for having diversity and hopefully balancing it well.
I appreciate that question. I don't have hard numbers here, but I can tell you that, for example, on the Tyson Chicken Factory, there is a lot of people that happen to be New Americans working there. On the tobacco farms, there are many Latinos that work on those farms. I mean, there are Latinos that are all over, Latinos and New Americans that are all over the state doing the jobs that the locals cannot do or won't do.
Or don't want.
And so there is pockets of big numbers of New Americans and Latinos that are throughout the state. I didn't come prepared to give you accurate numbers. And also, like I said before, sometimes it's very hard to get accurate numbers because people don't want to be identified. They want to just stay outside the limelight for some reason. But if we didn't have this workforce in the state wouldn't be doing as well as it's doing now, because they really do jobs that locals would want to do. That's how I got my first job. I was working in Ohio at a community development corporation, and I needed an architect to work on planning this inner city neighborhood redevelopment. And they put an ad on the paper, they couldn't find anybody, and I was loving it. I was in heaven, and I applied, and they hired me, and when I applied for my visa, I got it. I got an H-1B visa because I was doing a job that nobody local wanted to do. So I don't think that is that people are lazy. I think it's just people have so many opportunities that they will just do another job. But then you still need somebody to go and pick up the tobacco and take care of the cattle and do the framing on the houses and clean the hotels and do all these jobs, and so that's where many times we come in. But I also want to say that I don't want you to think that all New Americans are on the labor force that way. I mean, you will find New Americans that are lead surgeons in Vanderbilt or professors in Belmont or heads of industry in the big companies, and so you'll find New Americans all over the place. People tend to think that New Americans are only doing the framing on those houses you see on the side of the road, but we are all over the place. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any idea when the Sister Cities movements started, and has that had any influence on people coming to Nashville? There are a lot of different ones.
I think it has had an impact because it puts us on the map, but I don't necessarily think that is the main reason why people come to town. Like, I see a lot of Venezuelans come into town, and I suspect it's because some Venezuelan came at some point, it did well, they go like, this city is nice and welcoming, so I'm going to bring my sister, my brother, and then my in-laws, and then people start coming. And a lot of the weddings I'm doing now are from Venezuelans for some reason. And, and they tend to live in the area around Laverne, on Rutherford County. And I think that's another thing. When you're the first generation immigrant, you want to feel safe. You want to be around people like you. And so if there is a neighborhood where you can find that food that you ate back home in your block, you go there, go to the grocery store, get that stuff you like, and you feel safer. And so it tends to be like that, but second generation, that goes away. I want to emphasize again that it's not a long-term thing. When people tend to, move into a community to be safe, once they feel safe, they go away. They'll buy a house in the suburbs and they do the American dream, if they can afford it. Yes, ma'am.
You said that integration wasn't just a matter of language, but I wanted to share our experience helping an Afghan family settle. Without the language, you really can't communicate, and Google Translate doesn't do as good a job as you hope it would. The family that we helped had 6 children, ranging in age from 25 to 6. The parents didn't know English. The wife had never even been literate in her own language in Afghanistan because she couldn't go to school. And the older son, who had been an attorney there, spoke broken English. Sometimes, with trying the best you can, after 10 minutes, there's no other words they know, and it is difficult. And for Afghans, there are very few people who spoke Farsi. Fortunately, we had some Iranian friends who could communicate, but I think the language plays a great big role. And there weren't enough adult classes that they could attend here. Whereas in Georgia, they make more of an effort. So I think it depends on the state you're in, what programs you have access to.
I agree. I saw statistics that show that of all Latinos in Nashville, maybe 25% don't speak any English, but then after that it starts going up into knowing enough to order a burger on a McDonald's, for example, to like top English, like being able to write a paper about quantum mechanics. It's like it depends on, it's not that everybody knows enough English to read an economic treaty or a legal document, but after 25% people start being able to be functional enough to work. So it's not a black and white thing. It's not that you either know English or don't know English. It's just, there are levels of skills. But I do many places that offer English classes for free. As a matter of fact, they might invite me many times to come and talk to the students. One of the groups that does an effort to teach is the Catholic Charities. They make sure the refugees have some level of English skills to be able to move around the city and have a path to integration. Like I said, it's don't expect people to know perfect English, but they will know some English to be functional. Although some people have a hard time. My brother-in-law, for example, it took him over 10 years to be able to allow himself to learn English. And some people have like imposter syndrome or a issue with learning a different language, and it's just tough, but at some point, hopefully, they all learn enough to be functional. Yes?
Just to revisit the question about the built environment.
Yeah.
Affordable housing would seem to be an issue, not simply in Nashville, but in a lot of places. You had commented about the point of entry for people being housing that could be afforded. How is that being addressed, or do you see it being addressed, the maintenance of affordable housing?
Well, it's a political question. When I was in the council, I passed legislation to ask the planning department to come up with a plan, and we end up having an inclusionary housing plan to, this thing wants to restart all the time. And then the state preempted it. And so it's very hard to, at this time, to come up with a way to leverage resources to be able to provide for that affordability that many people want and need. I think again, I don't want to start talking about affordable housing, but my advice would be that we don't look at affordable housing only in terms of new houses, but if we can help the elderly to stay at home by making the homes more accessible, to do the minor repairs that they need so they can stay in those homes many times, that makes a difference. So it's a comprehensive approach to the issue. And with immigrants, the problem is, and I learned that the hard way, I came here and I had no credit story. So I will want to get a credit card and they won't give it to me. And I'm like, how do I get a credit card? Well, you need a credit score. Like, well, I don't have a credit score. Well, it's a vicious circle. I mean, the natives get to have a credit story because they start them very young to get, credit, and so they can actually do that. But you will find that many new Americans don't have any debt because they really can't get any debt. They don't have access to credit, so they'll live on a cash system. And they'll save enough money to buy a car or to buy a house, but they cannot really afford to go and get credit. And so it's a different economy that has to do with the fact that, when you're a new arrival, you don't have access to credit. And that impacts, if you go rent an apartment, they want to look at your credit story. Even though you're not buying the apartment, your credit story will tell them if you're somebody that is worth renting to. So it has an impact in affordability and housing. You guys asked me some really good questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so is with us. He's lived the story. He came with a degree, and he's built quite a reputation in town. Many of you knew his name. Thank you very much. Now, yes,
How did you happen to pick Nashville to come to?
how does he have what?
How did I pick Nashville to come? The program brought me to Columbus, Ohio, and I lived there for 5 years. And then, by then I was married. My wife's father developed Alzheimer's, and my wife's sister lived in Chattanooga. So we came to Tennessee to share in taking care of my father-in-law, and then we just stayed here. And that was like 25 years ago, no, 28 years ago. So it was a good place to raise the kids, I guess.
So my follow-up question is, have you ever written any country music songs?
What about country music? What did you, I couldn't hear.
I wondered if you had ever written any country music songs.
You know, the first time I heard bluegrass was in Israel, when I went there when I was a kid. But in Argentina, we don't do country music, so I didn't know anything about it.